What if most brain training apps are actually slowing your cognitive progress down? You get into them because you want to speed up how you think, improve how much you remember, but it turns out those things are not nearly as good for your brain as you might think. Now, that doesn't mean they have zero benefit whatsoever, but cognitive training apps are very, very questionable, and we'll get into some of the research today in this episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. But ultimately, spoiler alert, the truth is that real cognitive training does not come from playing games on flashy apps. As the founder of the Magnetic Memory Method, the author of The Victorious Mind, and a memory coach with over a decade of hands-on experience, I've helped thousands of people get real results that come from proven mental techniques used by memory champions, of course, language learners, even brain injury survivors, some of whom have been guests on this podcast. So, in case we haven't met before, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com, and in this episode, you're going to discover what cognitive training really is. I'll also expose why most apps for cognitive training fail, and you'll discover some research-backed ways that actually improve your memory, your focus, and your learning speed. And the best part is that the improvements you seek can start to emerge faster than you might think. So we're going to dive into an amazing episode, and we've got to address the elephant in the room before we get into the routines that I want to suggest for you. But first, a little bit of related housekeeping. I just did an interview with John Michael Greer, who is a fellow mnemonist. If you don't know that term, mnemonists are people who professionally use memory techniques or have some professional element that involves memory techniques. And John is a translator of a memory teacher from the Renaissance named Giordano Bruno, and the translation he produced is called On the Shadows of the Ideas. Years ago, I interviewed him for the podcast, and we caught up to have a chat in advance of a project he's working on that involves Renaissance memory training and more work on Giordano Bruno. And the reason why I mention it in the context of cognitive training is because I asked him, why are you getting back into this stuff? And he said, because people's ability to think is slumping. It's being degraded, and we need to do something about it. And there's a cultural shift he's noticed, as I have as well. I just gave an AMA on Reddit, for example, and it's quite pleasing. We had a technical hiccup, and some of the comments got lost for a couple hours or whatever, but there's a lot of really interesting questions there. And so basically that's a conversation that's coming. And if you would like to be notified wherever you're listening to this, make sure you're subscribed, hit the thumbs up, enable notifications, etc., so you don't miss this conversation with John Michael Greer. And just in general, come to magneticmemorymethod.com. Make sure to subscribe to the free course so that you and I have a common dialogue about the memory techniques that I teach, and we have a frame of reference so that every other episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast you listen to is more valuable to you. A lot of people say, where should I start with all of this? And that's where to start, at magneticmemorymethod.com. Take the free course. Even if you only do a little bit of it, you're going to get so much more out of this massive back catalog of episodes I've created for you over the years. There are more new episodes coming, and I'm just very, very excited about memory and its potential. And I'm very, very excited that I'm not the only one who trains these techniques. And just having someone like John Michael Greer as part of this mission, this project, is an amazing gift to all of us. So I wouldn't want you to miss it if you have any interest at all in cognitive training, because he has resources that are really, really great. And we'll talk about some of them probably later today in this episode, if I remember. Okay, so can cognitive training really improve memory? That's the elephant in the room. And the answer is absolutely yes, but there's a catch. There's always a catch. And the catch is that you actually have to train. You can't be passive about it. And so that means that you have to get good training that challenges you. And a lot of these apps out there have the illusion of challenge. And they can have some transfer effects. but those transfer effects are pretty limited. Now, what do I mean by transfer effects? Well, often people ask me, oh, I can use Duolingo, but I can't speak a language. I get all the bells and whistles and so forth, but it never translates to fluency. Well, no, because it doesn't have transfer effects. It may have near transfer effects, which means that you can go take another language in Duolingo and do well again, but it's not going to get you outside of the app environment. Now, today's episode is not about state-dependent memory. It's not about context-dependent memory, but rest assured, I know a lot of science words that can explain this. But there's another thing that is an elephant in the room, and that is that you actually have to need cognitive training. And this might sound kind of counterintuitive, but there is a reasonable chance that you're looking for cognitive training, but you actually don't need it. And that's because you may actually just have brain fog that is coming from dietary issues. So braining yourself with a brain training app isn't going to help. Brain training alone won't help you if you have brain fog. You may need to take a permanent holiday from foods that harm your brain. Or it could be that you have stresses that you deal with, anxieties that lead to thought blocking. That can be a whole other realm that needs to be explored. So please see a doctor so that you can get some help, because you could be spinning your wheels in the wrong direction. And, it's so much better for you to see doctors to help you check out what might be really going on. And then just seeing doctors is a good thing, because you could avoid medical issues in the future if they flag anything. So, doctors, I don't want to sound preachy or anything like that, but please, you want to ask, and your doctor may say, yes, you do need cognitive training, and they may have suggestions for you that I'm not even aware of, and then you could tell me about them, and I can add them to a future version of this podcast. All right, so how exactly does proper cognitive training work? Well, as I explained some time ago in my podcast on spaced repetition, cognitive skill training was first studied quite seriously by scientists in the late 19th century. And very briefly, Hermann Ebbinghaus, he trained his cognitive mind to memorize over 2,000 nonsense syllables. And his quest to understand the nature of memory as a cognitive ability helped us understand a great deal about what it is that we are training. And so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I've talked about it quite a bit in another episode. But what it boils down to is that brain plasticity exists. There are certain activities that can make your brain better by changing your brain through neuroplastic efforts. So you can do neurobics, you can use brain games, you can do memory games. And what exactly all these things mean, the definitions are actually quite fluid and fixed. You could do concentration meditations. You could read more to improve your mind and your memory and your cognition. The key is to avoid brain training apps, because scientists agree that the evidence just isn't there to support using them. So if that's the case, what is it that's really going to help? Well, you need mental stimulation. And, there's research about all kinds of things that give mental stimulation. And one of the things that came up in my recent Reddit AMA, which is Ask Me Anything, in case you're not familiar with that term, AMA, we did it, or I did it, and the community was part of it, and lots of great questions. One of the things that came up there was dopamine resetting, for example. And so that's one thing to look into is, are you getting away from the apps? Because we have a lot of problems in our society where we're just online all the time, and it's reducing our ability to think, and it's reducing our ability to remember. So you can look in the catalog of my back issues for dopamine resetting, and what you're looking for, and this is well demonstrated in science, is you're looking for dopamine resets that change you from exposure to phasic dopamine and more of what's called tonic dopamine. So phasic means that you're getting these brain spikes, but tonic dopamine is like a straight, beautiful line. And you'll get that from various things, getting out in nature, journaling by hand, and so on. So cognitive training benefits are just all over the place, but you need to often just get offline so that you're able to reset the dopamine, right? So it's not even just about training. It's about training in an environment in which that you are not getting exposed to phasic dopamine spikes, and you're allowing yourself to have a more solid state line that is called tonic dopamine. And tonic means, in this case, just source. You're at that base level. So now, with all that in mind, what can you do? Well, here are 5 science-based mental exercises, mental cognitive activities that boost brain power. And they aren't just simple as cognitive training, but they are very, very, very powerful environments or places or ways or strategies to get yourself cognitive training. And keep this larger point in mind. You want tonic dopamine, a straight line of dopamine, regular healthy doses of dopamine in your brain, not phasic spikes. And those spikes come from switching between tabs and playing games with bells and whistles and all that sort of stuff. So the first activity I'm going to suggest for real cognitive training is to play challenging games, but not on your own, not crossword puzzles. Crossword puzzles let you cheat. It's way too easy to look up the answers. What is that doing? Well, it's probably spiking your dopamine in a way. Or you have this dopamine deficit and you're trying to get it back to tonic. Because when you're challenged and you're frustrated, or you're challenged to the point of frustration, you go and you look for a way to restore this level of your brain. That's not good. You need games that push you a little. And there's lots of memory exercises, lots of brain games, etc., that are going to push you to a point of challenge. And I can't tell you every single game under the sun. You got to know thyself a little bit and try to figure out what's going to work for you. But sometimes, if you're on my email list, you'll notice that I sometimes host Memory Detective. This is a live game. It involves lots of memory exercise, passive memory exercise, active memory exercise. And I created a whole novel tie-in. The novel belongs to the Memory Detective series. It's called Flyboy. I'm almost done the sequel, Vitamin X. And why? Well, partly is just because I always wanted to write novels. And then I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could teach memory techniques through the story form? And knowing the story that goes along with the larger Memory Detective universe gives you the opportunity to exercise multiple levels of your memory. And this would be true if you are playing all kinds of other games, Warhammer or whatever, these kinds of worlds, Dungeons and Dragons that have stories and movies, etc. You're getting a lot of brain power exercised because you're drawing upon larger narrative worlds in an offline environment with people who share that common lingo, those common reference points and so forth. It has to exercise your memory, right? Because you're using words that you share that are specific to those environments. It's just wonderful. Now, you can also do challenge games amongst yourself, like from the memory competition world. You don't ever have to go to a memory competition to do what memory competitors do. You can memorize a deck of cards. You can figure out what your record is, and then you can work to beat it. If you follow my project, you'll know that I did an experiment with subliminals, and I listened to subliminal recordings while memorizing a deck of cards, and I knew what my benchmark was, and I tried to beat it with subliminals, but the subliminals actually made my results go down. But it was still pretty impressive that I could memorize cards at all, listening to those horrible noises. My point is that I was playing a challenging game, and I was adding frustration and obstacles to make the game even more challenging. So you want to try to challenge yourself. And in the Smithsonian magazine, there's some research about this that you can look, where training your memory and training your brain like a memory champion is really, really a positive and powerful thing to do. So at the risk of repetition, you don't have to go to memory competitions in order to do what memory competitors do to train, and you'll get benefits from them. Now, another cognitive training exercise, this isn't going to sound like cognitive training exercise, but it really is. Go take a course. A lot of us haven't gone into a room with other human beings for a long time. We've been in online course land. But taking courses and meeting people gives you multiple levels of cognitive exercise. So my wife and I, we took a painting course a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. Not only did we exercise different aspects of our minds, but we got physical exercise going to the class, and then we met interesting people we never would have encountered otherwise. And just even if we didn't talk to them, we were around them, we overheard their conversation. And this is just a wonderful way of getting lots of your brain lit up, right? Now, the kingpin really is the next couple of exercises. Pick a language. Bilingualism can help keep your brain sharp as you age, and it's just so important to know, if you don't know already, about the principle of cognitive reserve. So what is that? Cognitive reserve is basically a kind of shield that you build that protects your brain against things like dementia. And we have seen in the research that people who develop at least some level of cognitive reserve, they can actually get dementia and have every sign of dementia in their brain scans, but not show any symptoms of it. So that's the term of the shield that protects your brain. So learn a language. That's one of the best cognitive training exercises you can imagine. It's an incredible mental fitness routine. Now, related to this, you can learn music. And you might not know this, but you can study music theory, never play an instrument, and still get cognitive training benefits. You can sing and get cognitive benefits. And also, there's people who sing and they have stress reduction. They have their brains create more healing chemicals. And this is an extraordinary, wonderful, wonderful means of improving your brain. Now, music is related also in an older training paradigm that I said at the beginning in relation to John Michael Greer that I was going to see if I could remember to talk about it. And one of the resources that John Michael Greer has is something called the Sacred Geometry Oracle. And in the Sacred Geometry Oracle, he gives you a number of cards that have geometrical shapes, circles, dodecahedrons, these kinds of things. And then you can work with them in your mind. And you might be thinking, well, what the heck does this have to do with music? Well, music is essentially geometry. And so I would suggest you add the actual physical geometry to your training, work with this material, and do it in a way that, is not necessarily, oh, Anthony says it, do it this way, that way, or whatever, but in a way where you just explore the idea of memorizing information and playing with it in your mind, rotating it. And so memorizing a song, memorizing song lyrics, memorizing a tune, even if you don't study any music theory, can really help. But then actually going and learning some music theory so that you understand why music operates in the way that it does is going to give you cognitive fitness like crazy, right? And you might doubt it, but it's brain training. And people who put in the time to do this, they end up with more pleasure. When I was working with the Sacred Geometry Oracle, I remember getting on the bus and just appreciating I don't know what you call it, the engineering or the physical design, the visual design of the bus so much more. It's just a bus. It's like pretty mundane in one sense. But somebody worked out the engineering in order for the handrails to look a particular way. And, you remove the judgment of the ugly yellow paint and all that sort of stuff. It's like, that shape is really, really interesting. I wonder how that helps keep this bus, as a holistic structure in shape. Now, let me go one step further here, because a way of getting better brain training is to revisit how our ancestors used to train their brains. And so geometry and music used to be part of a thing called the quadrivium. And the quadrivium, you weren't even allowed to study it unless you had mastered the trivium. So what's the trivium? So I think in Latin we probably would pronounce it trivium and quadrivium, something like that. But the trivium was three things you needed to study, and that was logic, grammar. And grammar didn't mean grammar necessarily in the way that we mean it now. It meant like philosophy as well, and knowing basically how to analyze ideas in various ways based on how they were expressed. it's kind of hard to explain what this specific meaning of grammar is, but it did have to do with grammar in the sense that we mean, but it was more related to expression. And then expression in terms of persuasion was rhetoric. In rhetoric was the art of memory. So those are the three rivers of the trivium. And then the quadrivium was what I just said, music, and it was geometry and arithmetic and astronomy. And so those were the four rivers. And if you studied those things, you had a greater sense of proportionality, you had a greater sense of dimension, you had a greater sense of rhythm and harmony, not just in music, but in the world as such. So I would highly recommend that you make a deep dive study into the trivium and the quadrivium. I haven't done nearly as much as I would like to, but there's a movement. And as John was telling me, there's been a lot more homeschooling, better said, and a lot of these parents, they find the trivium and the quadrivium, and they get their kids learning Latin and all this sort of stuff, and it's just wonderful for what it does for your mind, because you start to think bigger, you start to question things critically, and I highly recommend it. Now, I got one more tip for you on this episode for getting some really strong cognitive training, but I want to do a Q&A first, just to really summarize the ideas that we've been sharing today and really get a handle on cognitive training. So the first frequently asked question, and again, this is coming from my experience as the creator of the magnetic memory method and the author of lots of books, including The Victorious Mind, about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to brain training. The number one question is, do cognitive training apps really work? And the reality is that some of them provide short-term gains in the specific tasks that they train. And so you may get some benefits from pattern recognition in matching games, but they don't transfer how to use your memory and focus for learning in everyday life. We just don't see that. So for lasting results, hands-on methods like memory techniques, especially when you're applying them to language learning or problem-solving games where you're with people like Dungeons and Dragons or Memory Detective or Warhammer, all these things. I'm not that familiar with the world of games other than the ones that I've created. But in any case, I know there's lots out there, and you should explore them with real people to get the maximum cognitive exercise. Then, what are examples of real cognitive training? And I think the examples I've just been talking about again, but in addition to using memory techniques, learning new languages, learning about music, or even going so far as to learn to play a musical instrument, solving logical puzzles, and engaging in complex reading is really, really important. But add writing. So that's a real cognitive training circuit. You read something and then you write about it. And you might be thinking, yeah, but I don't have anybody to read my writing. Well, you can read your writing. And another thing that John Michael Greer mentioned was the Commonplace book at the end of that episode. I know now you're thinking I'm not even going to listen to that episode. Well, please do listen to it, because there's more than what I'm summarizing here. But he said, check out the Commonplace book. And a couple of weeks ago, I had an episode about Thomas Jefferson. He kept commonplace books. And I keep a commonplace book. I keep a couple of different versions of journals. I never think of them as commonplace books, but effectively that's what they are. And just briefly, you read a book and you have another book beside you, and when something strikes you as being interesting, you write down not only what it was, but where you found it. And it's very, very powerful. So those are some examples of real cognitive training. Now, you might ask also, how often should I do cognitive training? And, there's no cookie cutter answer here, but try to have 3 to 4 sessions per week, around 15 to 30 minutes each. And it's just like physical fitness. Consistency matters more than the duration, and real improvements are going to come from steady, repeated engagement with mentally demanding tasks. And when it comes to physical fitness, you can have mentally demanding physical fitness as well, such as walking backwards. And walking backwards is something that's known to help improve memory. And I do that. I was just doing it yesterday, and it really, really helps my focus and my memory. I noticed it immediately when I started doing it regularly. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, but I'm in this Q&A section. Let's review it. Can cognitive training help with memory loss or brain fog? It certainly can, but only when it's paired with lifestyle changes. So poor memory is often linked to sleep deprivation, stress, diet, or other health issues. And if you're experiencing any kind of brain fog that you can't settle by just making some dietary changes, talk to a doctor. And even before you make dietary changes, it's good to run it past a doctor. Ask them about cognitive training as a powerful supplement to a healthier lifestyle. And yeah, they may come up with suggestions that I haven't made, but I just encourage you to go beyond Sudoku and crossword puzzles and all this sort of stuff. Get into something that's really multi-level training. Now, some people will ask, is there a best cognitive training method? And I really don't like this idea of what's the best. I mean, if there is a best, it's the thing that you'll actually do consistently. And you got to experiment to find that, because nothing is for everyone. But memory techniques like the Memory Palace, they consistently deliver strong research-backed results. The key is just to choose something challenging that you're going to enjoy and stick with and actually really, really get good at it. Now, if I had to pick the best, I'd say language learning is probably the best activity for helping your brain because of what we see in the research for cognitive reserve. And there's many research papers that evidence this. So before I get to my final tip, cognitive training really does improve your brain, your memory, your ability to focus, and you just need to make sure that you rule out other issues. Pick the activities that suit your desired goals, engage in them consistently, and I hope that you get into the path of the memory master. That's my biggest tip of all. Memory techniques have been around for a very long time, and for a good reason. You can use memory palaces to learn languages. You can use them to help you remember names, numbers, long passages of scripture, speeches, historical dates. And I've had everyone from 10-year-olds to retirees master these techniques. And, you can learn them in a variety of ways. The Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass is one of those. But in order to get started, just visit magneticmemorymethod.com. Take the free course if you haven't already. And you're going to get started building a brain that remembers everything you learn. But here's the cognitive exercise for you. You want to get out a pen and paper and start with the letter A and go to the letter Z and try to work out one memory palace for every letter of the alphabet. Now, I know people say, but what about Z? I don't know anyone whose name starts with Z. Well, zebras are at the zoo, and zoo starts with Z. X. Well, maybe you saw some X-Men movies at a movie theater, so you can use that. That's the principle of substitution. Just do your best. You don't have to fill in the whole alphabet. Just get started and work with the alphabet, because then the next step is to create a number of figures, or assign, probably better said, a number of figures based on the alphabet A to Z, so that you have these figures. So back to Z, Billy Zane, I have for Z. He's an actor you may not know. He was in Titanic. What about X? Well, I have Zentipia, Xenophon, Xerxes, and on. Professor X from the X-Men movies. And if I couldn't find an X person, I might use Wolverine, because he can use his claws to make an X. In Latin, I memorized omnium expetendorum prima esse sapientia in qua perfecti boni forma consistit, which means, choose wisdom above all things, because in that choice is the form of goodness itself. But Wolverine there, for that word, expetendorum, he makes the X with his claws. So his name doesn't start with X, but that's the principle of substitution. So that's just a simple exercise that's going to get a lot of memory exercise, because it's going to stir up what's already in your brain. So many of us struggle to use memory techniques because we just don't complete those exercises. I complete those exercises all the time. I have the alphabet on cards, and I just look at them, and I look at S, and I go Seinfeld, Superman, Simon and Garfunkel, and I just play. And sometimes I roll the dice, and I say, okay, so I'm on the letter L. I'll have to find 5 people that start with the letter L. In the future, I will release another game that I've created that makes this something that we can do together. I've tested it with a bunch of people. I've been so busy with so many projects that I haven't been able to finalize releasing it, but it's going to come eventually. And I thank everybody who supports this project so that I can develop these things. And I appreciate the patience of those who have been waiting, especially for Vitamin X, the second novel in the Memory Detective series. I never thought of it before, but I started announcing things that I'm working on. And I never used to do that, but since I started doing that, and I got to maybe stop doing that, the phrase, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, that's starting to make a lot of sense to me, because I never felt so obstructed. I used to just finish things and then announce them. But I maybe need to stop doing that because of that principle. But nonetheless, I still have been able to deliver a lot of things, and I appreciate the support of the people who get my books and courses and come to my live workshops. And there's a new live workshop coming very soon. So thank you for being a listener to the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Thanks for being part of this world. And cognitive training really does work. It's just that you need to be involved in the personalization process, and you really want to figure out what is it that you want to improve in your cognition, then find the activity that will do that for you, and before you know it, you will indeed enjoy better cognition, better memory, better focus, and you don't have to expose yourself to apps to do it, because those apps are shown to not deliver the effects that they promise, and they expose you to the digital environments that are creating digital dementia. So that's enough for this episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Thank you again. And until we have a chance to speak again, come visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com and keep yourself magnetic.